All right, let's say you've come to this conclusion. You're like, I'm just not a good person, or I'm not as good of a person as I want to be. But I don't know how to become a better person. I don't know what I should be doing or not doing. What do I do? And you can see that if we put this question to an egoist, to a utilitarian, to a Kantian, to a person who subscribes to any of the other ethical theories that we've discussed so far, the answer is going to be pretty straightforward, right? The egoist is going to say, look, you've got to figure out what your best interest is, and you've got to figure out how to best advocate for that. Or the utilitarian is going to pull out that calculus of felicity, the hedonic calculus. And they're going to say, we got to determine what the greatest good for the greatest number is, and then how to best pursue that. And Kant is going to drag out the categorical imperative or the means ends principle. And again, these all seem to provide a pretty straightforward path toward becoming a better person, if a better person is a person who does the right thing. But virtue ethics is going to struggle a little bit to provide as clear of a path, because virtue ethics doesn't establish for us what the appropriate virtues are for us to embrace. And virtue ethics doesn't establish for us what the proper goods are that we should be aiming at. And virtue ethics certainly doesn't provide us any particular moral code or moral rules or behavior. So if we want to be a virtue ethicist and subscribes to its principles, what do we do? And there's a real danger here, because somebody could exploit that vagueness inherent in virtue ethics to convince not only others, but themselves that they're actually on the road to becoming a better person and doing the right thing. Because they could attach to their behavior a lot of moral language about compassion and honesty and trustworthiness and so forth, and all of these virtues that we've been exploring. And they can identify for themselves what they think the goods are that they should pursue, and then justify the pursuit of those goods by explaining why these are things that make them a better person. But really, we could just be falling back into a kind of relativism, right? A kind of subjectivism where I claim to be aiming at the goods of life that I've identified because those are the goods that I've identified. And I think these are the virtues that I should embrace in pursuit of those goods because these are the virtues I've decided I need to embrace in pursuit of those goods. And we're kind of back in this solipsistic bubble again, where we're sort of justifying what it is that we think is the right thing to do based on our desires. And that can be dangerous. Like I say, both for others that we are treating in particular ways and for ourselves if we really do want to be a better person. So what do we do here? Well, Aristotle says this. He says, you got to get out of this circularity by recognizing this. We are what we repeatedly do. And excellence, and by this he means like that excellence of character, that fully flourishing, thriving human being. Excellence then is not an act, but a habit. Okay, so the important line here is we are what we repeatedly do. And what Aristotle's going to recommend is this. He's going to say, look, you've got to find a moral model. You've got to find a person who you believe is oriented toward the right goals, the right goods in life, and who has embraced the proper set of virtues in order to attain those goods in life effectively. And what you're going to do is you're going to model your life on theirs. You're going to think like they think. You're going to act like they act. And because what you repeatedly do is what you will become. So you're going to find this role model for your ethical life, right? So you're going to put on the little bracelet that says, what would Buddha do? Or what would Jesus do? Or what would Scooby do? And that's going to serve as your reminder that as you go through life, you're thinking like this other person who you've identified as being a better person than you. And you're going to try to make yourself more like that person, okay? So what Aristotle says is that you're going to become the kind of person that you think you should be by doing the kinds of things that person does. Okay, so what he says here is, by practicing virtue, we learn it. Just as the builder learns to build. We become just by doing just acts, temperate by temperate acts. Okay, so the thinking here is that you got to fake it till you make it. Okay, and Aristotle's idea is if you start doing the kinds of things that you believe a good person does, then eventually, out of habit, you'll become the kind of person that does those things. And interestingly, right, Aristotle's coming up with this over 2,000 years ago. We're now finding that cognitive behavioral therapy, which is a very modern form of psychological therapy, and has proven to be, at least the evidence seems to be pointing so far, the only effective model of therapy. Cognitive behavioral therapy embodies this same idea, right? The idea with cognitive behavioral therapy is I have these thoughts that lead to these actions, and I'm dissatisfied with me doing these things in my life. I keep hooking up with this kind of person over and over and over again, and that kind of person is not good for me. Well, cognitive behavioral therapy would say, okay, wait, hold on. Stop the thought you're having, put it in check, set it over there, and then force yourself to do the thing that is really difficult for you to do, but is the thing that you wish you would do naturally. And if you do that enough, eventually, you're going to become the kind of person that does that thing. You can see here, in the second quote here, it is clear that he who acts must have knowledge, he must choose his act, and his act must proceed from his character. So just actions are those the just man does. So maybe think about it this way. I heard a radio host once give this example. Every day he would get a cup of coffee and he'd get in his car and he'd drive to work. And then when he got to work, he'd set his coffee cup in the back seat. And then he would realize at the end of the week, he's got 5 coffee cups sitting in his back seat. And he wanted to change this habit so that he didn't wind up with a cluttered backseat, a backseat cluttered with coffee cups at the end of the week. And so he forced himself. He put a little Post-it note on his dashboard that said, "Take the coffee cup back inside." And so then every day he would read that note as he got home, and he'd pick up the coffee cup and he'd take it back inside. And eventually, after doing this enough times, it felt weird to him to not take the coffee cup inside at the end of the day and to leave it in the car. So in other words, he had developed a habit of character that made him into the kind of person who didn't want to leave coffee cups in the backseat of the car. And this is kind of what Aristotle's driving at here, is a just person is a person who does just acts because they emanate right out of that person's character. Okay? So you become the kind of person that you want to be by practicing being what it's like to be that kind of person. And eventually you become that kind of person. All right. But Aristotle wants to remind us, don't forget, luck plays a role in life. Okay? So you can't live well. You can't be you can't be flourishing. You can't be thriving as a human being if you're not virtuous. You have to be virtuous if you're going to live well. But just because you're virtuous doesn't guarantee you're going to live well. The world is full of examples of people who live these really terrible lives, but who are very good, hardworking, virtuous people. Okay? So virtue is necessary, but not sufficient for living a thriving life.